Hello everyone, I'm Jovan, and today we'll be talking about heroes and anti-heroes in literature. So firstly, I think let's start off by defining certain key terms that we'll be using a lot later. Firstly, the hero. I don't think this needs much defining. Usually when you mention the word hero, a superhuman character comes to mind, like Superman or the Hulk or any of the Avengers really. But when we use the word hero as well, you usually also think of more grounded characters or rather people. So maybe real life characters like Limbo Singh or Martin Luther King Jr. And I think that's one of kind of the key points that we'll be discussing today, which is the duality of the hero. So the hero character or the hero itself usually grapples with a dual identity of firstly this mortal vulnerable individual who goes through like a trial of obstacles or a bunch of challenges in order to reach the end goal. But on the other hand, the hero is also celebrated as a sort of superhuman figure who transcends all these mortal restraints and ultimately transcends all the setbacks that are placed before them. And they ultimately come out victorious. And it's interesting also because I have this note here that says the appearance of heroes in literature marks a revolution in thought that occurred when poets and their audiences turned their attention away from immortal gods to mortal men. So there's been a shift in interest from the superhuman to more of the vulnerable, lowly human being. And these mortals, of course, they suffer pain and death, but it is in defiance of this that they live gallantly and fully and create through their own efforts a sort of glory or a sort of myth or legend that makes permanent their legacy and makes permanent their story and makes permanent their achievement. And I think it's because of this that we can class heroes as sort of the prime example of human beings in literature, because in literature usually the protagonist has to go through a bunch of obstacles and setbacks before they emerge victorious out of all that. And I think that aligns exactly with what a hero is, and well, we usually class protagonists as heroes. And I think moving deeper into what we'll be discussing today, so we'll be discussing two poems about the Merlion. Firstly is Ulysses by the Merlion by Edwin Thumboo, and the next one is simply titled The Merlion by Alfian. And going to a more specific topic, we'll not just be talking about heroes, but more of the tragic hero. So the tragic hero is defined as usually a great or virtuous character in a dramatic tragedy who is destined for downfall, suffering, or defeat. And when it came to the Merlion, what came to my mind was actually the tragic hero in Shakespearean tragedies. And the idea of tragic heroes in Shakespearean tragedies is that usually it's their strength, their strongest point that actually leads them to falter, that leads them to screw up and results in like a bunch of death and failure at the end. For example, we have the tragic hero Hamlet. So Hamlet is this this prince who meets his father's ghost, and he becomes so obsessed with avenging his father and bringing his father's killers to justice that eventually it leads him to this like semi-suicidal revenge plot that results in a bunch of deaths at the end. Yeah. And right, I think it will all make more sense when we jump into the poem. So I'll start by reading of Ulysses by the Merlion by Edwin Thumboo. And to give a bit more context, Ulysses is another name for Odysseus from the epic Greek poem The Odyssey. So it's basically about this guy Odysseus who's finished fighting in the Trojan War and he's trying to head home, but for some reason he lives in like Ohio or Yishun and there's a bunch of monsters that are standing in his way. Yeah. Ulysses by the Merlion by Edwin Thumboo. I have sailed many waters, skirted islands of fire, contended with Circe who loved the squeal of pigs, passed Scylla and Charybdis to 7 years with Calypso, heaved in battle against the gods. Beneath it all I kept faith with Ithaca, travelled and travelled, suffering much, enjoying a little, met strange people singing new myths, made myths myself. But this lion of the sea, salt-maned, scaly, wondrous of tail, touched with power, insistent on this brief promontory, puzzles. Nothing in my days foreshadowed this half-beast, half-fish, this powerful creature of land and sea. People settled here, brought to this island the bounty of these seas, built towers topless as Ilium's. They make, they serve, they buy, they sell. Despite unequal ways, together they mutate, explore the edges of harmony, search for a center, have changed their gods, kept some memory of their race in prayer, laughter, the way their women dress and greet. They hold the bright, the beautiful, good ancestral dreams within new visions, so shining, urgent, full of what is now. Perhaps having dealt in things, surfeited on them, their spirits yearn again for images, adding to the dragon, phoenix, Garuda, Naga, those horses of the sun, this lion of the sea, this image of themselves. Now, of course, reading this poem, it's made pretty obvious that the Merlion is sort of like a very, very conventional hero. So the Merlion is like this really exalted symbol of Singapore, this really superhuman figure, superhuman in the sense that the Merlion is able to transcend like human constraints and human mortality and all that. But yeah, and it all comes together with the very image itself, right, of Ulysses, this Greek hero who fights past all these sea monsters and gods like Circe, Scylla, Charybdis, and Ulysses literally heaved in battle against the gods. And it's interesting because in the first stanza, the final line, Edwin Thumboo here actually mentions the idea of myths. Because when we think about myths, usually there's connotations of some like really deep cultural or historical tradition, maybe even fantastical sort of connotations. But if we actually consider the truth behind the creation of the Merlion, it was really just a symbol created by the Singapore Tourism Board just to promote tourism, really. And I think another interesting thought to consider here is whether the act of myth making is heroic in itself, right? Because myth making, when you come to think of it, it's something that transcends the individual. It's something that lives within and lives among a collective. It's something that can bring societies together and even bring societies apart, right? And enough digressing. So yeah, there's a lot of talk about the Merlion being this strange half beast, half fish creature, and and throughout the poem, the Merlion is sort of painted as or uh, implied as standing on sort of equal footing with Ulysses. So it's like a testament to the sort of power that the Merlion inspires in people. And of course, the stanza here: people settled here, brought to this island the bounty of these seas, built towers topless as Iliums. They make, they serve, they buy, they sell. So the plosive alliteration here: brought, bounty, built. It further highlights this the role of economics and Singapore's economic success actually as a trading post in developing that national identity and developing that myth, that legend of the Merlion. And so that's something to keep in mind for later when I start reading Alfian Saad's The Merlion. And now another very, very striking few words here. In this stanza: despite unequal ways, together they mutate. So they referring to Singaporean citizens. And mutate here is a very striking word to use, because mutate would sort of suggest like an inherent incompatibility. It sort of suggests something that's unnatural, that doesn't follow the laws of nature, which isn't wrong, considering the time period and even considering the demographic of Singaporeans today. These are people of different races, different religions. These are a very diverse group of people with largely differing beliefs, which is of course referenced in these few lines as well, right? Search for a center, have changed their gods, kept some memory of their race in prayer, laughter, the way their women dress and greet. So there's an attempt here to just put down all your various cultures and religions and whatnot, and try to find a sort of common ground in maybe a common human instinct. And right, moving on to I think what is the most interesting image, or the most interesting final few lines here. In the final stanza, Thumboo, or the speaker, mentions that their spirits yearn again for images, adding to the dragon, phoenix, Garuda, Naga, those horses of the sun, this lion of the sea, this image of themselves. So the first point to consider here, which is made quite bluntly, is that the Merlion is a one-for-one representation of the Singaporean people. And of course, this links to that narrative of struggle, the narrative of eventual triumph over all the adversities that people face into building Singapore into the prosperous nation that it is today. And I think another point that we can consider here is it's also referencing our essential desire for a combined or for a fixed national identity. Or it could also mean a desire for a superhuman representation of ourselves. So superhuman, again, as in not really like superhuman, but as in like just a symbol that is able to transcend like all those vulnerabilities that come with being a human. And yeah, this is a very basic sort of heroic poem about this Merlion as a representation for the Singaporean people who have triumphed over all the obstacles that are thrown at them and eventually succeeding. And it's a very beautiful celebration of that, I would say. Now, moving on to The Merlion by Alfian Saad, this is where the whole tragic hero idea comes in. So I will first be reading the poem itself. I wish it had paused, you said. It's quite grotesque the way it is, limbless. Can you imagine it riding in the water like some post-Chernobyl nightmare? I mean, how does it move? Like a torpedo? Or does it shoulder itself against the currents, gnashing with frustration, its furious mane bleached the colour of a drowned sun? But take a second look at it, how it is poised so terrestrially, marooned on this rough shore, as if unsure of its rightful harbour. Could it be that, having taken to this unaccustomed limpidity, it has decided to abandon the seaweed-haunted depths for land? Perhaps it is even ashamed, but what a bold front, to have been a creature of the sea. Look at how it tries to purge itself of its aquatic ancestry in this ceaseless torrent of denial, draining the body of rivers of histories, lymphatic memories. What a riddle, this lesser brother of the Sphinx. What sibling polarity, how its sister's lips are sealed with self-knowledge and how its own jaws clamp open in self-doubt. Still surprised after all these years. Yet, what brand new sun can dry the iridescent slime from the scales, and what fresh rain wash the sting of salt from those chalk-blind eyes? A pause. And why does it keep spewing that way? I know exactly what you mean, I said, eyeing the blonde highlights in your black hair and your blue lenses the shadow of a foreign sky. It spews continually, if only to ruffle its own reflection in the water. Such reminders will only scare a creature so eager to reinvent itself. Another pause. Yes, you finally replied. That a quiet accent of yours. Well, yes, but I still do wish it had paused. So that was The Merlion by Alfian. And I think before we engage in further discussion, it's also important to note the difference in time period. So obviously, Alfian's poetry was written I would say in the 90s, late 90s, I'm not very sure. But it's in a more globalized Singapore. It's written in a Singapore that's more exposed to Western culture and that's gradually becoming more engaged with Western culture. And I think henceforth marks the start of the end for our tragic hero here today. So essentially the Merlion here, the Merlion as in the poem here, discusses our sort of internal struggle with our own national and individual identity. So the main similarity between the two poems here, and I think the main reason why I chose these two poems as a sort of comparison, is that the Merlion is a one-to-one representation of us. Except in this case, it's described in these really gross, repulsive terms. So it's grotesque, it's limbless, it's a post-Chernobyl nightmare. There's a kinesthetic imagery of it shouldering itself against the currents, gnashing with frustration, its furious mane bleached the colour of a drowned sun. So you have all these rolling R sounds to kind of signify that sort of conflict and that physical it's sort of like a friction. So if you think about the image itself of shouldering itself against the currents, gnashing with frustration, it's sort of like trying to push back against the tide. And yeah, if you remember just now, a very choice word used by Thumboo is the word mutation. So in this case, the image of shouldering itself against the currents, it suggests a sort of like physical disabilities or physical ailments brought on by mutation, right? Like sort of like going back to the image of Chernobyl, like brought on by radiation, or in this case brought on by that internal struggle with itself to find its own identity. And moving on, we're also seeing a lot of clues here that lock us into this really insecure, this really hesitant and uncertain Merlion. So the Merlion here is unsure of its rightful harbor. Its own jaws are clamped open in self-doubt. And very interesting here are the comparisons to its cousins in other lands as well. So the Merlion is described as a lesser brother of the Sphinx. Okay. It's also described it's also compared to the Statue of Liberty, right? So just now the image of its own jaws clamped open in self-doubt, but the Statue of Liberty's lips are sealed with self-knowledge. So there's all these debilitating comparisons to other non-Singaporean statues here that go on to re-emphasize the Merlion's own insecurity with itself and its own inadequacy when it compares itself to all these other national icons or monuments. And when we consider the stanza, perhaps it is even ashamed to have been a creature of the sea. Look at how it tries to purge itself of its aquatic ancestry in this ceaseless torrent of denial, draining the body of rivers of history's lymphatic memories. So there is a very, very conscious effort here to clear away its own heritage, to clear away its own historical culture, its own upbringing, in order to replace it with something that's more, I would say, Western, with something that's more global. And that feeds into not just the Merlion itself, but also the personas that are talking about the Merlion in this poem, right? So the speaker's friend here has blonde highlights in their black hair. You see the color contrast to make it stand out. They also have blue lenses, the shadow of a foreign sky. Consider the use of the word foreign. And also the persona's friend has a quiet accent. So considering all these descriptions, what comes to mind immediately is, like that one friend that went to the UK for like 1 or 2 years and they come back speaking in a very thick British accent. And I mean, I think that's sort of what the speaker is trying to go for here. It's a Singaporean people that have triumphed over all the obstacles that are thrown at them. It's a Singaporean people that have emerged victorious with a sort of economic success, right? But at the cost of the economic success is the need to connect with the rest of the world, right? To connect with a more globalized economy, to exploit that globalized economy. But there's also side effects of partaking in globalization. So for example, in this case, cultural, I'm not sure if this is too strong a word, but a sort of cultural erasure or a sort of cultural internal struggle to decide whatever culture one should align towards. Or maybe there isn't any struggle at all, right? Maybe one has already decided to move away from their own heritage. So that was Ulysses by the Merlion by Edwin Thumboo and the Merlion by Alfian. I hope you've enjoyed my little pseudo-intellectual discussion today. And have a nice day.